Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another developer Q&A video for EVE Echoes. Each week the developers take 4 questions posed by you, the community, and respond to them, posting those answers to the official EVE Echoes Facebook page and Twitter account. Now I like to go through these each week to give my own personal thoughts and opinions on the questions and on the answers given. I think it's an interesting way to see what the developers are looking at adding to the game in the future, and it gives us all an insight into both their process and what's coming in future. If you have a question you would like to ask the developers, there's a link in the description down below of this video that you can click through. It will take you to a Google document, you can ask your question, and if yours is one of the ones chosen to be responded to, you will win a month of Basic Omega. And if you let me know your thoughts and opinions on all of this in the comment section below, you're in for the chance of winning a month of Combo Omega, courtesy of my weekly giveaways. Now, with all that said and done, if you do enjoy this kind of video, let me know by hitting like on it, subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, and if you want to really help me out and keep me doing what I do, you can pledge to support me on Patreon, and indeed we have a Redbubble merchandise store as well, where you can grab cool t-shirts like this one. Anyway, all that said and done then, let's jump straight into this week's developer Q&A, which is for the week of the 30th of March through to the 5th of April. Question number 1. There are some ships that have a scan strength bonus, like the Blackbird series and indeed the Griffin, but currently this bonus is completely useless. Do you plan to change it during upcoming balance patches, or maybe add some usage for it? I kind of wonder if this is maybe Geekoforta, because talking about ECM is one of his big pet peeves in EVE Echoes. For those of you who don't know, ECM, or Electronic Countermeasures, is an E-War system in EVE Online. Basically, it fights with the ECM jammer, fights against the scan strength of the ship that it's targeting, and if the ECM jammer wins, or when it eventually wins, it causes that ship to lose all of its locks. You force a target ship to lose all of its locks, so they have to lock back on to be able to fight again. It's a really cool bit of E-War. It is very powerful in EVE Online. It's a very popular form of E-War, so I can understand why people want it in EVE Echoes. Obviously, it does mean it needs a little bit of balancing. It's worth noting, because you might be thinking, well, hang on then, if the Caldari had this, what about the missile disruptors? Well, missile and tracking disruptors, guidance and tracking disruptors, are both a MAR. You fit a tracking disruptor module to your ship, and then you put in a special script that decides whether it's going to be a tracking disruptor or a guidance disruptor. I could see this being added to the Caldari in the future. They get that ECM module back, at which point the guidance disruptor and tracking disruptor bonuses both move onto the Amar ships, and you just fit whichever module you think is going to be the one for you. Anyway, let's have a look at Wilson's response, reading here on my phone. In an upcoming balance update, we'll make adjustments to the roll bonus of the Argus Assault 2, I think that means Algus Assault 2, the Blackbird and its variants. At the same time, we'll also be keeping a close eye on other ships that have the scan strength bonus. Ultimately, this is basically their way of saying, at this point in time, we're not looking to add ECM. It might be something that we add in future, but for now, we're just going to basically give those ships actual meaningful bonuses while taking away the useless ones. Kind of makes sense. When you design a ship, you kind of have to look at that ship. In Magic the Gathering, they call this like the colour pie, where you kind of take things that fit that ship and you put them in, but only to a certain amount. If you've played games like Stellaris, or heck, if you've rolled a D&D character, you know what this is like, because you've got all of those different stats, and you've just got to put those limited numbers into a certain number of boxes, which means you are always going to have some positives and some negatives. If you need to increase something, you have to make cutbacks elsewhere. You can't just give everything to a particular ship. Ultimately, what they've done here is it meant that because there were these ECM bonuses on the Blackbird, it didn't have as strong missile bonuses as perhaps the Bellicose would. Unfortunately, because ECM doesn't exist in EVE Echoes, that just meant that it got, points that were used in the developing of that ship, so to speak, used on something that's completely irrelevant. So I'm glad to see that they are addressing this. That said, I would love to see ECM added at some point in the future as well. Let's move on to question 2. Are there any plans to bring back the Covert Ops or E-War Destroyers as playable ships in a near future? Pause there. I don't think E-War Destroyers were ever a thing. We had E-War Frigates at Tech 6, hidden E-War frigates that just don't exist on the tech tree when you actually have a look at them. It meant that you had the Crucifier at tech level 4 alongside the Maulus, the Griffin, and the Vigil. And then at tech level 6, you had the Crucifier E-War, the Vigil E-War, the Maulus E-War, and the Griffin E-War. And these were basically bonused for even more electronic warfare. So for some reason, those exist in the game files still, but we've got no way to actually access them. And if you actually look into, I think it's Tech 8 anomalies, you'll find that there are cruisers under the Bellicose, Arbitrator, Celestis, and Blackbird that also have E-War in the tagline. You can fight those ships. They don't appear on the ship trees at all, but when you are in a Tech 8 anomaly, there is a chance of fighting, say, a Bellicose E-War. These were cruisers that had very strong electronic warfare bonuses at the expense of some of their weaponry bonuses. Now, finally on this front, at Tech level 10, on the battlecruiser branches, there also used to be E-War versions of battlecruisers, the Hurricane, Harbinger, Drake, and Brutix E-War. Again, these were basically souped-up versions of their Tech 8 equivalents that also had electronic warfare bonuses added on as well. They were really cool, really powerful. I'm still a little bit sour that those got removed. I'm hoping one day that we get those back as the Hurricane Fleet issue, the Brutix Navy issue, the Harbinger Navy issue, and the Drake Navy issue. We'll see. Anyway, so are there plans to bring back the Covert Ops or E-War destroyers as playable ships in the near future? I think this will turn destroyers a bit more popular class in the game and more useful in large fleets operations. Let's read the response from Wilson. Increasing the use of destroyers is also in our plan, but currently we would not consider adding Covert Ops destroyers or E-War destroyers. And this actually reflects what I've been saying about this. A lot of people say, oh, they took away the Covert Ops Thrasher, Cormorant, Coercer, and Catalyst, and they gave us an Interdictor 3 in response. And I agree with that. I am also personally really disappointed to this day that the last of the combat turret destroyers are at Tech 5. You have the Coercer Navy issue, the Catalyst Navy issue, Cormorant Navy issue, and the Thrasher Fleet issue at Tech Level 5, after which none of those destroyers, none of those 4 destroyer hulls are actually bonused for combat. They're all Interdictors at that point onward, which just makes me super sad to see, because the Interdictors don't actually do that much between Interdictor 1, 2, and 3, and we lost basically a really cool combat ship that I thoroughly enjoyed flying when I tested it on Fulmination. I thoroughly enjoyed flying it. We lost that, and it got replaced with a ship that's barely better than its Tier 9 equivalent. Like, it's not doing anything noticeably different. Now, I've said before that clearly NetEase obviously took these away for a purpose. They didn't want us to have Covert Ops destroyers, and I can appreciate that. What gets me is that they took away a Covert Ops destroyer and they gave us something useless in return. If they don't want us to have Covert Ops bonus destroyers, just give us a Thrasher Assault or a Thrasher 3 or a Thrasher 2 fleet issue. Whatever way you want to name it, just give us a combat destroyer with turrets at Tech Level 10. I would be so happy to be flying a 3-guild Belt Shark again. I love creating new characters because I have a reason to actually fly the Thrasher again in those. Yeah, it's kind of sad, but there we go. E-War destroyers, again, something that they're not necessarily looking at adding, although someone actually did come up with a really good point the other day. Making the drone bombs, the anti-drone bombs, making those large modules that you would normally fit onto a battleship, but then releasing a series of destroyers that had bonuses like stealth bombers, but specifically for these bombs. So that you get, like, a situation where you've got an anti-drone, a Thrasher anti-drone or whatever, a Thrasher pulse bomber. And it's a special destroyer that is designed to fit these modules. It gets a power grid reduction so that it can fit them, and it gets bonuses to the damage so that that's what those are actually doing. That, to me, would be really quite cool, and they did talk about, like, a kind of special use for destroyers at some point in the future. It was mentioned in a previous dev Q&A that there was the possibility of adding destroyers that could do things like decloaking enemy ships. This to me would be an interesting use of destroyers, although I'm glad to see here that increasing the use of destroyers is in their plan. I'm still in constant talks with the developers about that very topic. It is probably one of the closest to home for me. I know some people accuse me of being, like, you know, single-sighted on just the destroyer issue. I kind of disagree on that. I do look at all problems, but it, to me, is the one that I personally want solved most. It's the one that would affect me most. Like, when I talk about getting rid of tech levels or talk about industry and mining, these are things that I think could be fantastic for the game and the community as a whole. They wouldn't affect me. I'm championing those because I think they would be good for the game, not because they would be good for me. That's the difference here. With destroyers, this is something I personally really want to see. I really want to have a reason to actually fly destroyers. Anyway, question 3. Due to the fact that in May, the industry update should come, I wanted to ask how it looks with the skills to build the industry capitals, the Rorqual that is. Will there be 2 new skills for the assembly? Currently, there is the general capital construction skill that gives the parts and the time of the dreads and carriers. Will the industry capitals also fall back on this general and then add an extra skill only for the industrial capitals? Basically asking the question here, will there be a new skill directly for, industrial capital ship production, or will it just rely on capital ship production? Now, in Pixie responds, the production of industrial capital ships will also be affected by the current capital ship manufacture skill, and there will be a specialized skill for industrial capital ship manufacturing too. This basically means that if you are skilled into capital ship manufacturing, you are going to be better at building the capital ships, the capital industrials. However, they will also be adding another skill that can make you even better at crafting those. And I think that's a really cool way of doing things. Ultimately, there's a kind of a pro and a con to that. On one hand, you could say that, hang on, that's going to be reducing the amount of ores consumed and things like that as well via skills. But at the same time, it gives something for industrials to skill into, and with capital ships, those do actually use a decent amount of ore. I just kind of wish the balances were a little bit skewed the other way, but hey, that's a topic for a different video. Topic for a video I've done many, many times already. Finally then, question 4. Are there plans to have anti-cloak ship structures in player-owned sovereignty systems? There's currently no way to counter trolls that keep their alt accounts cloaked in a hostile sov all day. Yeah, I kind of get this. I'm a covert ops specialist myself. I tend to fly ships more if they've got a covert ops cloak available. I love my Astero, I love my Explorers, my Stratios. Again, thank you to Austin and the gang for building the Stratios recently. That's been absolutely amazing. I can't wait to undock it after April. I love the Explorers, I love the Astero, I love the Stratios, I love all the Covert Ops cruisers. That's a class of ship I really enjoy flying, but I agree, excuse me, I agree that right now you can basically just park a stealth bomber or something in a system and use it as a camera indefinitely. You can just watch local and get way too much information. Now, I think it was one of the CEOs of Imperium in EVE Online wrote a lengthy thing to CCP, like a lengthy report talking about exactly this issue. And there were some brilliant suggestions there. If I can find it, I'll link it in the description down below. Ultimately, I agree that this is a problem, even though I'm a covert ops cloak specialist. Anyway, what does Melos say? We've also received a lot of feedback about not having a countermeasure against cloak players in sovereignty systems. Passive defense, such as an add-on structure, will overly suppress cloak modules. I agree there, you do want to have the ability to cloak into an enemy system and be able to scan, you just don't want it to be completely uncounterable. Equally, you don't want it to be impossible, because that takes away a lot of the abilities for things like scouting and information gathering. We're more inclined to add new anti-cloak modules to the game to maintain the balance between offense and defense. The specific plan is still under discussion, and I will contact Melos on this, because the more I think about this being a module, the more I really worry about it. Because ultimately, the simple point of having like covert ops cloaks on things like the Wreath, is because the Wreath 2 at least, is because you want to be able to use these to run gate camps. You land in a gate camp with covert ops cloak on, you manually pilot your way through to the gate and you walk through to safety. Or on the other hand, you come into the gate, you jump through a gate into an interdictor sphere gate camp, you then sort of do the little trick where you just immediately put up the covert ops cloak, you power the heck out of there, and you get to safety while everyone is trying to decloak you. If it's something like an anti-drone pulse bomb that you just click the button and poof, everything in a radius gets decloaked, that makes gate camps super powerful and reduces, in fact, I would argue, removes the covert ops cloak's ability to actually run gate camps, which just further puts power in the pocket of interceptors, and I disagree with that massively. And I think that's also a really overcomplicated way of doing it. I think the developers have a habit of doing stuff like this. They get these really cool ideas and they run with it. And I love that they're passionate. I love that they think about this kind of stuff in such a way that they really want to run with it and go for it and do something new and exciting. That said, I'm also a believer that sometimes the simplest option is the best option on the sheer dint that it's simple. It's kind of, I think it's the scientist in me, it's kind of Occam's razor being sort of applied just to general game development even. To me, all you need to do is just make covert ops cloaks use fuel. It's really that simple. If covert ops cloaks use fuel, you cannot use them indefinitely. You have to eventually dock up and refuel. And if you are in hostile enemy territory, you're not just going to be able to dock up and refuel, like, nice and easily. You're going to have to find a way to get fuel to the actual place where you are. Okay, admittedly, you could, whilst you're in hostile territory and you're cloaked, you could set up PI, look around for fuel there, and just when your account looks like it's getting low on fuel, you warp away, you go and get the fuel, then you come back. But also, in order to loot that, you do have to drop your cloak for a brief bit of time in order to actually get the fuel, and it's another thing that you'd have to do. So, to me, that's still somewhat of a counter. I don't know the actual answer to this, but when I think about this, giving covert ops cloaks, in fact all cloaks, a fuel consumption to them, yeah, I think that's probably the way forward. And if people are worried about, like, well, okay, if we add, like, fuel consumption to these, then, you know, that's really, really nerfing and negatively affecting, we can add a covert ops cloak skill as well. I've argued this one before in other places. Covert ops should have a skill where you reduce things like the amount of fuel used by the cloak, or indeed so reduce the amount of fuel that the cloak consumes. You can also have it reduce the scan resolution penalty, or the recloak penalty, because when you drop a covert ops cloak, there is a certain amount of time before you can recloak. And I think you could have a skill that reduces that time, reduces the fuel that the covert ops cloak would use, and reduces the scan resolution penalty. I think it is important that we keep the lock-on delay, that when a cloak drops, you have 15 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, depending on the ship, before you can actually lock on to a target. But I think that's an important thing to keep on cloaks. But if you're worried that adding a fuel consumption to cloaks would be badly received, you could add a skill to then reduce that and do some other stuff for covert ops cloaks as well. To me, that would be pretty cool. Anyway, as he says here, the specific plan is still under discussion, sorry. I will be talking to Melos about this a lot. If you have feedback and ideas, get into the suggestions channel on the official Eve Echoes Discord. It's a great way for the developers to see what you're thinking. Let me know in the comment section down below as well. Remember, every single week, I give 3 lucky people a month of Combo Omega. One of those is given to someone who commented on a YouTube video, randomly determined. 2 of them are given to people who are in my Discord and talking in the public channels. So make sure you're on my Discord as well, giving me feedback there, giving me feedback in the description down below, so I can then pass this on to the developers. You might have some really cool ideas, and I would love to be able to message Melos and say, hey, this is my idea, and look at these people who agree with me. But equally, look at these people who had other suggestions or had other ideas. I'd rather go in not just with my idea, but with a whole load of evidence and other suggestions for them to consider as well, because the developers obviously can then have a wide variety of ideas, and we can help make this game better together. Anyway, folks, that wraps things up for this week's Developer Q&A. I think there's some really cool questions there, some really interesting stuff. Certainly, I'm looking forward to seeing changes to covert ops ships, whether it's just the cloaks and things like that, or whether it's, of course, the Blackbird here getting some buffs as well, because, yeah, I love the Blackbird hull, and I'm just really excited to get to fly it in April. Anyway, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching this one right the way to the end, folks. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!